The condescension in Dr. Williams' voice was unmistakable as he dismissed Alex's background during the medical conference. "Your father's just a hospital janitor? How quaint," he smirked in front of the entire surgical team. But when the trauma patient arrived with multiple gunshot wounds and the lead surgeon froze in panic, Alex's father quietly stepped forward, his hands moving with surgical precision that made everyone realize they were looking at someone whose medical knowledge had been earned in the worst possible places. Welcome to the human story. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden expertise, sacrifice, and the true meaning of healing, tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching this video today? And if you believe that real heroes often work in silence, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. The automatic doors of St. Mary's Hospital slid open with their familiar whoosh as Carlos Mendez arrived for his 6 a.m. shift, the same time he'd been arriving for the past 8 years. At 55, he moved through the corridors with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew every corner of the building, every hidden shortcut, every squeaky wheel on every piece of equipment. Carlos wore the same navy blue uniform every day, environmental services embroidered in simple white letters across the chest pocket. His graying hair was always neatly combed, his work boots polished despite their age. He carried himself with a dignity that somehow made his humble uniform seem less like a costume and more like a choice. To most of the hospital staff, Carlos was invisible, just another member of the cleaning crew who emptied trash cans and mopped floors while they went about the important work of saving lives. They spoke around him as if he weren't there, discussed cases and politics and gossip while he quietly went about his tasks. But Carlos saw everything. He noticed which nurses were overwhelmed, which doctors were struggling with difficult cases, which patients needed just a moment of human kindness. He had developed an instinct for reading the subtle signs of distress that went beyond his janitorial duties, though he never spoke unless absolutely necessary. What they didn't know, what nobody at St. Mary's knew, was that Carlos had once held a scalpel with the same steady hands that now pushed a mop, that he had performed surgery under conditions that would paralyze most doctors with fear, that he had saved more lives in a single deployment than most physicians saved in entire careers. 6 floors above, Dr. Alex Mendez stood in the conference room of the surgical wing, trying to focus on the morning briefing while fighting the familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach. At 28, he was one of the youngest residents in the trauma surgery program, and he had earned his position through relentless studying and natural skill. But there was one aspect of his background that he'd worked hard to keep hidden from his colleagues. "All right, people," announced Dr. Williams, the chief of surgery, as he strode into the conference room with his usual air of authority. "We've got a busy day ahead. 3 scheduled surgeries, 2 emergency cases already in queue, and we're expecting a possible trauma transfer from the county hospital." Dr. Williams was everything Alex both admired and feared in the medical profession. Brilliant, confident, and utterly convinced of his own importance. He commanded respect through a combination of genuine skill and calculated intimidation, and he had little patience for weakness or uncertainty. "Before we begin," Dr. Williams continued, his eyes scanning the room, "I want to congratulate Dr. Chen on her acceptance into the Cardiothoracic Fellowship at Johns Hopkins. Outstanding achievement." A round of applause filled the room as Dr. Chen, a 5th-year resident from a prominent medical family, smiled graciously. Alex joined the applause while mentally calculating how many more years of proving himself lay ahead. "Dr. Chen's success reminds us," Dr. Williams said, his tone becoming more pointed, "that excellence in surgery often runs in families, medical dynasties, if you will. Dr. Chen's father is the department head at UCLA. Her mother is a renowned cardiologist. These connections, this background, they matter." Alex felt his cheeks beginning to burn. He could sense where this conversation was heading. It's fascinating how family background shapes medical careers. Dr. Williams continued, seemingly casual but with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. "Dr. Rodriguez here comes from 4 generations of physicians. Dr. Patterson's grandfather founded the cardiac unit at Mass General." The room had grown uncomfortably quiet. Alex realized that everyone was waiting for Dr. Williams to finish his point. "Of course," Dr. Williams said, his eyes finding Alex across the room, "not everyone has that advantage. Dr. Mendez, for instance. Alex, remind us again what your father does." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Alex felt 20 pairs of eyes turned toward him, some curious, others already smirking in anticipation. "He works here at the hospital," Alex said quietly. hoping that would be enough. Yes, but in what capacity? Dr. Williams pressed, his smile becoming sharper. I seem to recall it's something quite humble. Alex's throat felt dry. He could lie, deflect, change the subject. But Dr. Williams clearly already knew the answer and was enjoying the moment too much to let it pass. He's in environmental services, Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Dr. Williams let out a short laugh. Environmental services, how quaint. He looked around the room as if sharing a private joke. Your father's just a hospital janitor? Well, that's certainly different. A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the room. Alex felt heat rising in his face as the shame washed over him in familiar waves. Nothing wrong with honest work, of course, Dr. Williams continued, his tone dripping with false magnanimity. Someone has to clean up our messes, right? But it does make one wonder about your perspective on medicine, whether you truly understand what it means to be a physician. I understand just fine, Alex said, his voice stronger now despite the humiliation. Do you? Dr. Williams challenged. Because surgery isn't just about technical skill, Dr. Mendez. It's about authority, about commanding respect, about belonging to a profession that demands a certain gravitas. That's difficult to develop when your role model pushes a mop for a living. The cruelty was casual, delivered with the kind of precision that suggested Dr. Williams had been planning this moment. Alex felt the familiar cocktail of shame and anger that had followed him through medical school, through residency, through every professional interaction where his background became relevant. Before Alex could respond, Dr. Williams had moved on, already discussing the day's surgical schedule as if the humiliation he'd just inflicted was merely a minor distraction. As the briefing continued, Alex stared at his hands, thinking about his father somewhere in the building below, quietly doing work that Dr. Williams considered beneath notice. The same hands that had worked double shifts to pay for Alex's medical school applications. The same hands that had never once complained about the sacrifices required to give his son opportunities he'd never had. The meeting broke up 30 minutes later, and Alex found himself walking through the hospital corridors with a heaviness that had nothing to do with his surgical rotation. He needed coffee, needed a moment to collect himself before his first surgery of the day. That's when he saw his father. Carlos was cleaning the windows of the main lobby, moving with the same methodical precision Alex had watched his entire life. He worked quietly, efficiently, making the hospital a cleaner, brighter place for everyone who passed through. Alex stopped, watching his father work, and felt a complicated mixture of love, gratitude, and shame that he'd been carrying for years. He loved his father fiercely, respected his work ethic and dignity. But in moments like these, surrounded by colleagues from medical dynasties and prestigious backgrounds, he sometimes wished his father's story was different. Carlos looked up and saw his son standing there. His weathered face broke into a warm smile, the kind that had greeted Alex after every difficult day since childhood. "Mijo," Carlos said softly, setting down his cleaning supplies, "how was your morning meeting?" Alex forced a smile. "Fine, just the usual briefings," but Carlos read his son's expression with the same precision he applied to his work. "What happened?" "Nothing, Dad, really." Carlos studied his face for a moment longer, then nodded. "Okay, but remember what I always tell you. The work speaks for itself. Everything else is just noise." Alex nodded, feeling simultaneously better and worse. Better because his father's quiet strength always had that effect. Worse because he realized he'd been letting Dr. Williams' noise affect him more than his father's wisdom. They were interrupted by the sharp blare of the trauma alert system echoing through the hospital corridors. Trauma Level 1, incoming ETA 3 minutes, GSW to chest and abdomen, possible internal bleeding, all available surgical staff to Trauma Bay 1. Alex's pager buzzed simultaneously with the announcement. He looked at his father apologetically. "I have to go save lives," Carlos said simply, the pride in his voice unmistakable. Alex hurried toward the trauma bay, his personal concerns temporarily shelved in favor of the immediate medical emergency. This was why he'd become a doctor, for moments like these, when nothing mattered except skill, knowledge, and the determination to preserve life. The trauma bay was controlled chaos when Alex arrived. Nurses prepped equipment, residents scrubbed in, and Dr. Williams stood at the center of it all, barking orders with the confidence of someone who had handled thousands of similar emergencies. The ambulance doors burst open, and the paramedics rushed in with their patient, a young man, maybe 25, with multiple gunshot wounds to the torso, blood soaked through the bandages the EMTs had applied, and his vital signs were dropping fast.
"Talk to me," Dr. Williams commanded as the paramedics transferred the patient to the trauma table. 24-year-old male, 3 GSWs to the chest and abdomen, the lead paramedic reported breathlessly. Lost consciousness twice en route, BP dropping, possible pneumothorax on the right side. Alex moved into position, his hands already working to assess the damage while Dr. Williams took control of the situation. The patient was unconscious, pale, and bleeding internally at a rate that suggested they had minutes, not hours, to save his life. "Get me 2 units of O-negative stat," Dr. Williams ordered. "And prep, or 3. We need to open him up now." But as they worked to stabilize the patient for surgery, something went wrong. The young man's blood pressure crashed completely, his heart rate became erratic, and suddenly he went into cardiac arrest. "He's flatlining," one of the nurses called out. Dr. Williams moved to begin chest compressions, but something in the patient's condition seemed to rattle him. Alex had never seen the chief of surgery look uncertain, but there was something about this case: the severity of the wounds, the rapid deterioration, the complexity of multiple trauma sites that seemed to exceed even his considerable experience. "The bleeding is too extensive," Dr. Williams muttered, his usual confidence wavering. "I can't get a clear view of the damage with all this blood." Alex watched as the most skilled surgeon he knew began to show signs of panic. Dr. Williams, his hands, usually steady as stone, had developed a slight tremor. His breathing was becoming rapid and shallow. "We're losing him," Dr. Williams said, and for the first time Alex heard genuine fear in his voice. That's when Carlos appeared in the doorway. Alex wasn't sure how his father had gotten past hospital security into a restricted trauma bay, but there he was, still wearing his environmental services uniform, his cleaning cart abandoned in the hallway behind him. "Excuse me," Carlos said quietly, his voice cutting through the controlled panic of the trauma bay. Dr. Williams looked up, irritation replacing fear. "We don't have time for cleaning right now. Get out." But Carlos was already moving toward the patient, his hands steady, his movements precise and purposeful in a way that had nothing to do with janitorial work. "The bleeding is from a severed hepatic artery," Carlos said, his voice calm and clinical. "You need to clamp the vessel before you can see anything else." Dr. Williams stared at him in shock. "What did you say?" Carlos was already pulling on surgical gloves that he'd somehow acquired. "The hepatic artery. It's been severed by the abdominal gunshot. Clamp it first, then pack the wound. You have maybe 90 seconds before he bleeds out completely." Without waiting for permission, Carlos moved to the patient's side, his hands working with a precision that Alex had never seen before. His father's movements were surgical, confident, almost instinctive. "Who the hell are you?" Dr. Williams demanded, but he didn't try to stop Carlos. "Someone who's seen this before," Carlos replied, his hands already working to locate the source of the bleeding, "in places where we didn't have the luxury of hesitation." Alex watched in amazement as his father performed what could only be described as battlefield medicine: fast, efficient, and effective. Carlos clamped the bleeding vessel with a technique that Alex recognized from trauma surgery textbooks but had never seen performed with such speed and precision. "There," Carlos said, stepping back slightly. "Now you can see what you're working with." The difference was immediate. With the major bleeding controlled, Dr. Frenuels could finally assess the full extent of the damage. His confidence began to return as he took control of the more familiar aspects of the surgery. "How did you know to do that?" Dr. Williams asked as he worked. "Iraq," Carlos said simply. "Afghanistan, places where trauma surgery meant the difference between bringing soldiers home or sending them home in boxes." Dr. Williams looked up from the patient, studying Carlos's face as if seeing him for the first time. "You're a surgeon." "I was a surgeon," Carlos corrected. "Now I clean floors." Alex felt his understanding of his father shift completely. The quiet dignity he'd always admired, the precise movements, the calm under pressure, it all made sense now. As Dr. Williams and the team worked to stabilize the patient for transport to the operating room, Alex found himself staring at his father with new eyes. "Dad," he said quietly, "why didn't you ever tell me?" Carlos looked at his son, and Alex saw something he'd never seen before. Not shame exactly, but a deep weariness that spoke of carrying secrets for too long. "Because that life is over," Carlos said simply. "This is my life now." Dr. Williams had finished stabilizing the patient and was overseeing his transfer to the OR when he turned back to Carlos. "That was exceptional work," he said, his tone completely different from the condescension he'd shown earlier. "Where did you train?" "Army Medical Corps," Carlos replied. "Trauma surgery and forward operating bases, places where you learned fast or people died." "How long?" 15 years, 3 deployments, Iraq, 2 Afghanistan. Dr. Williams was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Why are you working as a janitor?" Carlos glanced at Alex, then back at Dr. Williams. "Because my son needed a stable home more than the world needed another surgeon." because being here, watching him become the doctor I always knew he could be, was worth more than any operating room. The trauma bay had grown quiet around them. The other residents and nurses who had witnessed the emergency were listening to this exchange with obvious fascination. Dr. Williams looked from Carlos to Alex and back again. "You gave up surgery to support your son's medical career." "I didn't give up anything that mattered," Carlos said firmly. "I chose what was most important." Alex felt tears starting to form. All these years he'd been ashamed of his father's humble job, embarrassed by his lack of prestigious credentials. But Carlos had been a surgeon, and apparently an exceptional one, who had sacrificed his own medical career to ensure his son could have one. "The patient," Alex said suddenly, remembering why they were all there. "Will he be okay?" Dr. Williams nodded. "Thanks to your father's intervention, yes. He should make a full recovery." He turned back to Carlos. "Dr. Mendez. And I assume that's the correct title. We need to talk. The hospital could use someone with your experience." Carlos shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm exactly where I need to be. Cleaning floors when you could be saving lives?" "I am saving lives," Carlos said, looking at Alex. "Just not in the way you might expect." Over the following days, word of the incident spread through the hospital with the speed of medical gossip. The story grew in the telling. The janitor who was secretly a war surgeon, who had stepped in to save a patient when the chief of surgery hesitated, who had given up his medical career to support his son. Alex found himself the subject of a different kind of attention. Instead of the condescending pity he'd grown accustomed to, his colleagues looked at him with something approaching awe. "Your father's a legend," Dr. Chen told him during a break between surgeries. "The nurses are saying he performed battlefield surgery in the trauma bay like it was the most natural thing in the world. Dr. Williams can't stop talking about it," added Dr. Rodriguez. "He's been asking everyone if they knew about your father's background." But Alex wasn't interested in his colleagues' sudden respect. He was more concerned with understanding the man who had raised him, the surgeon who had become a janitor, the war hero who had chosen invisibility, the father who had sacrificed everything for his son's success. He found Carlos in the hospital's basement break room, eating lunch alone as he always did. His father looked up as Alex entered and smiled with the same warmth he'd always shown. "How was surgery this morning?" Carlos asked. "Good. Fine." Alex sat down across from his father. "Dad, we need to talk." Carlos nodded, as if he'd been expecting this conversation. 15 years as a military surgeon," Alex said. "Iraq, Afghanistan. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Carlos was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because I wanted you to see me as your father, not as a soldier. That part of my life was about war. This part is about love. But you gave up everything. Your career, your profession, your identity." "I didn't give up my identity," Carlos corrected gently. "I chose a new one. Father was always more important to me than surgeon." Alex struggled to process this. "But you could have practiced here, in civilian hospitals. You could have had both." Carlos shook his head. "You don't understand what war does to a surgeon, mijo. The things I saw, the decisions I had to make, the people I couldn't save, that changes you. When I came back, I needed peace. I needed something clean and simple and healing." He gestured around the humble break room. "This place gave me that. Watching you grow up, helping you with your studies, seeing you become the doctor I always knew you could be, that healed me in ways that surgery never could. But people look down on you. They think you're just a janitor." "Let them," Carlos said with a shrug. "Their opinion doesn't change who I am or what I've done." Alex looked at his father, really looked at him, and saw someone he'd never fully understood before. Not a man who had settled for less, but someone who had chosen what mattered most. "Dr. Williams offered you a position," Alex said. "Chief of trauma surgery. You could go back to medicine and leave my son to face the world alone." Carlos smiled. "I don't think so. I'm not alone, Dad. I'm a doctor now. I can take care of myself." "Can you?" Carlos asked gently. "This morning when Dr. Williams was humiliating you about my job, how did that feel?" Alex felt heat rise in his cheeks. "That's different, is it? You've spent years being ashamed of me, embarrassed by what you thought I was. If you can't handle being the son of a janitor, how will you handle being the son of a surgeon who chose to be a janitor?" The question hit Alex like a physical blow. His father was right. The shame hadn't been about Carlos's job. It had been about Alex's own insecurity, his need for external validation. "I'm sorry," Alex said quietly. "I'm sorry I was ashamed of you." "You weren't ashamed of me," Carlos said, echoing the words Alex's mother had used years earlier. "You were ashamed of what you thought I represented. There's a difference." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both processing the revelations of the past few days. "The patient from yesterday," Alex said finally. "Will you check on him?" Carlos smiled. "I already have. He's recovering well. Should be back home with his family next week. You saved his life. We all did. That's what hospitals are for. Teams of people working together to heal. It doesn't matter if you're wearing scrubs or a janitor's uniform. What matters is being there when you're needed." That afternoon, Alex found himself in Dr. Williams's office, having been summoned for what he assumed would be another uncomfortable conversation about his background. "Sit down, Dr. Mendez," Dr. Williams said, his tone unreadable. Alex sat, preparing himself for whatever was coming. "I owe you an apology," Dr. Williams said, surprising him completely. "My comments about your father yesterday were inappropriate and unprofessional." "Thank you, sir. More than that, they were wrong." Dr. Williams leaned forward. "Your father is one of the most skilled surgeons I've ever seen in action. His ability to assess and respond to that trauma situation was extraordinary." Alex nodded, not sure how to respond. "I've been thinking about what he said," Dr. Williams continued, "about choosing what was most important, about sacrifice and priorities." He paused. "I have 3 children I barely know because I've spent their entire lives prioritizing my career over my family." Dr. Williams was quiet for a moment, then looked directly at Alex. "Your father made the opposite choice. He sacrificed professional recognition for personal fulfillment. That's not weakness, that's strength. He's the strongest person I know," Alex said. "I can see that now." Dr. Williams stood up. "I want you to know that your position here is secure. More than secure, you're one of the most promising residents we have, and that has nothing to do with your father's background and everything to do with your own skill and dedication." As Alex left Dr. Williams's office, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he'd been carrying for years. Not the weight of his father's job, but the weight of his own shame about it. He found Carlos in the surgical wing, quietly mopping the floors outside the operating rooms where Alex spent his days. His father looked up as he approached, and Alex saw him differently now, not as someone who had settled for less, but as someone who had chosen what mattered most. "Dad," Alex said, "I want you to know something." "What's that, mijo?" "I'm proud of you. Not because you're a surgeon, but because you're my father. Because you chose me over everything else. Because you taught me that real strength isn't about what other people think of you." Carlos smiled, the kind of smile that held years of love and sacrifice and quiet dignity. "And I'm proud of you," he said. "Not because you're a doctor, but because you're a good man. Because you help people. Because you never forgot where you came from." That evening, as Alex walked through the hospital corridors at the end of his shift, he saw the place differently. He noticed the environmental services staff working quietly in the background, maintaining the clean, safe environment that made healing possible. He saw the night security guards keeping everyone safe, the cafeteria workers feeding exhausted medical staff, the volunteers who provided comfort to worried families. All of them were part of the same mission: healing, helping, serving others in whatever way they could. The hierarchy that had seemed so important just days before now seemed arbitrary, almost meaningless. He found his father finishing his shift, putting away cleaning supplies with the same precision he'd once used to put away surgical instruments. "Ready to go home?" Carlos asked. "Yeah," Alex said. "I'm ready." As they walked to the parking garage together, Alex thought about heroes and sacrifices, about the difference between being important and being valued. He thought about his father, who had traded a legendary medical career for the quiet dignity of raising a son well, and he realized that true strength wasn't about commanding respect from strangers. It was about earning love from the people who mattered most, and being willing to be underestimated by the world if it meant being everything to someone who needed you. Carlos Mendez had been a combat surgeon, a trauma specialist whose skills had been forged in the worst possible circumstances. But his greatest surgery had been performed not in an operating room, but in the quiet moments of everyday life, carefully removing his son's insecurities and replacing them with confidence, love, and purpose. Some heroes wear scrubs and save lives in operating rooms. Others wear janitors' uniforms and save lives by choosing to be present when their children need them most. Both kinds of heroes matter, but only one kind gets to drive you home after difficult days and remind you that your worth isn't measured by other people's opinions. Carlos Mendez had chosen to be that kind of hero, and in the end that choice had made all the difference, not just for his son, but for everyone whose life Alex would touch, as a doctor who had learned that true healing begins with understanding the value of quiet sacrifice. The janitor's secret wasn't just that he had been a surgeon, it was that he had chosen love over legacy, presence over prestige, and his son's future over his own recognition. That's the kind of secret worth keeping, and the kind of hero worth celebrating, even if the celebration happens quietly, in the grateful heart of the child who was loved enough to be chosen every single day.